Now that the president's signature legislation has passed the House, it's on to the Senate. So what's the chance of passage there? Stephen Neukam from Axios up with me tonight here on the Final Five. I know you don't have the answer, but I'm sure you have some indications early on. Where does this stand right now?
Yeah, well, one, I think it's important to sort of take a step back and say that I think that the chances that it passes in the long term, in the big picture, are pretty good. This is something that leadership wants to get done. This is something that I think, Republicans writ large want to get done. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be speed bumps along the way. We know that this bill, again, cuts Medicaid spending. There's cuts to SNAP. There's a lot of cuts to social programs that concern moderates like Susan Collins, like Lisa Murkowski. So we've heard those concerns from sort of the moderate side of Senate Republicans. And then there's folks like Ron Johnson from Wisconsin who say these cuts don't go deep enough. We need to be more serious about cutting spending. So Senate Majority Leader John Thune has sort of these two sides to reconcile. And I think it's going to be an interesting battle. I don't know how long it will take or what it will look like. I think ultimately this gets done, but it will be interesting to see how Thune achieves that.
So the president had said something about wanting to get this passed by July 4th, or at least congressional Republicans, some sort of symbolic gesture there. At this point right now, with the back and forth, with the negotiations that are to go on between those different factions, when do they start that? When does that process alone start?
Well, they need to start it as soon as they get back to Washington next week. I'm sure those conversations already underway as, folks are out of Washington for the week. I think July, they want to get it done by July because you remember on the other side of the July working session is a month off for Congress. They're gone for all of August, at least scheduled to be. They could call them back. I think it's a little bit ambitious. You have to remember that this bill probably will be changed in the Senate. There probably will be amendments, which means that this bill has got to go back to the House. They may have to conference. They have to sort of reconcile those differences. So I think July is, an aggressive timeline, and it'll be difficult for Republicans to make that timeline.
One name that has come up, and I've heard this from some of your colleagues on Capitol Hill that surprised me with some of the objections was Josh Hawley of Missouri. It seems like his concerns are more on the Medicaid cut side.
Yeah, Josh Hawley has sort of been beating this drum for Republicans, saying that they can't touch Medicaid. A lot of the spending cuts are achieved by cutting the funding for Medicaid, maybe not benefits, but cutting around the edges, work requirements, making things more difficult for people to get Medicaid. And Josh Hawley and other Republicans, it's not just Hawley, but it's interesting that it's Hawley because he's not really this sort of moderate guy. He's more of a conservative that you would put in sort of that vein of a Republican. He's saying this is a political loser for Republicans, that you can't do this. You can't touch Medicaid to the tune of $800 billion and then go to voters in November of 2026 and expect to win. So he's saying that this is not something that Republicans should do. President Trump came to Capitol Hill last week, told Republicans not to touch Medicaid. But again, the reality is that how deep that they want to cut, they have to cut into Medicaid. And that's what this bill does so far.
I know President Trump apparently used some more colorful language than what you used there, but the sentiment stands. Interesting what you said, though, about how they would achieve these cuts, because I think that's what Democrats will say is they presume saying cutting Medicaid means you're cutting those benefits. Like you said, you're looking at more of the administrative, some of those other ends, and again, changing those eligibility requirements. And that has been a hot topic about the work requirements folded into this as well.
Yeah, I think anything that sort of changes the requirements around how you receive Medicaid, Democrats are going to call those cuts to Medicaid, cuts to benefits. I think Republicans, especially the ones that are leading the charge, would argue that that's not what they're doing, that they're trying to make it more efficient. But Democrats are going to call these cuts regardless, and they're going to use it on the campaign trail. They're going to use it all the way up to Election Day next year, and they're in a deficit. They have the minority in both the House and the Senate. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, they both see sort of this combination of tax cuts and spending cuts as a perfect storm for them to be able to go to voters and say, hey, vote for Democrats and give us back power in Congress.
Yeah, the one thing that Hakeem Jeffries has that Chuck Schumer doesn't, at least he has a narrower margin, or he had a narrower margin in the House, but it passed the House. We'll see where it happens.
Yeah, one vote by one vote.
Yeah. Stephen Neukam, good to see you again, man. Thanks for joining us.